regarding a very important question regarding the Palestinian issue, which is why do Jews or some Jews from different countries of the world immigrate to Palestine? The situation in Palestine is insecure. This lack of security is not these days, but throughout the history of Palestine, the situation in it has always been unrest, disturbances, revolutions, liberation attempts, and the possibility of loss of life. Regarding people migrating from the Jews to Palestine, why? A Jew from America either leaves Russia or Germany, leaves Egypt, leaves Morocco or Ethiopia, the countries from which immigration has occurred over the years. We are talking about 100 years now or more, the continuous immigration process to the land of Palestine of the Jews who leave the safe country stable somewhere and go to Palestine. This means a very important topic. Why? It is very important because if I understand the motives that prompted Jews to immigrate to Palestine, can I resist these motives? If I think about liberating Palestine, it is possible that in Hijra Aksi from Palestine to other Jews, that is, they emigrated from Palestine to others, if they found that the goals for which they came began to shatter or began to differ from their original situation. We must study this topic. Some brothers and sisters take one school and tell you that this is the answer, and this truth is an extreme analysis. What does this mean? This means that he believes, for example, that the motive is religious and bases all his theories on this topic, or the motive is an economic motive and bases his theory on this topic. In fact, the goals and motives may be very different from one to one. Everyone agrees that he is going to Palestine, but everyone has a different defense. I must be diverse in studying the issue and expand my chest to understand the different schools in analyzing the matter. And I see the truth that there is no one specific motive in which there may be more than one motive. But there are many motives that we are talking about today, especially 4 major motives that push the Jews to immigrate to Palestine. I must also take into account the historical stage, meaning the motives for immigration before 1917, which is the British occupation of Palestine. Change after 1900, before 1948, and after 1948 at major points. In the year 67, there was a major event, as well as the collapse of the Soviet Union in 91. There are specific goals in specific historical stages that may no longer exist, but could prevail elsewhere or increase rates. Of these proportions, the first impulse, which prompted Jews to immigrate from different countries of the world to Palestine. Contrary to what most viewers expect, it is the motive for persecution. We may be the one who says the opposite of what is expected, because most people think that the main motive today is the religious motive, if they are destined for a state from the Nile to the Euphrates, and thus they are fulfilling the Torah in migrating to the land of Palestine. This motive exists, but it is not the first motive that prompted the people of the Jews to come to the land of Palestine. The first motive was persecution. Persecution, what does it mean? I mean the Jews. In the late 19th and early 20th, or even the middle of the 20th century, they were very heavily oppressed in Europe and in Russia. And they are looking for any possible place that preserves for them something of dignity, something of existence, something of respect for humanity or self, because they are, Catholics were treating them very, very difficult workers in Europe and in the Orthodox as well as in Russia. This is the truth that prompted Hadar Herzl to think about the Zionist movement. Many people may not know that Tidar Herz for himself was secular. He was not adherent to his Jewish religion. He lived a difficult life in Europe, and he saw continuous persecution of the Jews because they were Jews and were very hated by the people around them, and therefore he wanted to live in a place there is a kind of safety for the Jews. He didn't care where this place was or ever. He is not referring to the Torah. He says that it is the Torah that said Palestine remains necessary for Palestine. No, he says there is no objection to it being Palestine. On the contrary, he was saying that Palestine was not good because his name could work, attracting a large number of Jews. Why is the name magic? Palestine, which is the promised land and has an ancient history. But he himself did not mind if they established their state in another place. There were some candidate places in it, such as Argentina, for example, completely far from the scene. It was Uganda. But the candidate Sinai was one of the candidate places, Cyprus, one of the candidate places. This candidate tells you the places candidates for the establishment of a state for the Jews. He was working on this project, and the Zionist movement did it, and they had no objection to it anywhere. But Palestine was clear because it would lie to the people. Religious people who have the idea of going to Palestine motivated by religion, and at the same time receiving support from Zionism. The Christian M. Because Christians, especially Protestants, many of them believe that Christ, peace be upon him, will not descend at the end of time to support Christianity on their approach or their belief, except after the establishment of a state for the Jews in the land of Palestine. This is part of the belief of most Protestants, and therefore the Protestant people support the establishment of a Jewish state in the land. A Palestine. So he wanted to exploit this support, and of course keep in mind this support, the large Protestant countries in the world, America and England. If he did this, he would receive the support of America or England. But the basis that prompted them to immigrate to the land of Palestine was the issue of persecution that existed in Europe and Russia. And by the way, this framework is not new. I mean, we said in the late 9th century, 12nd century, the 20th century was Zayed, but it existed long before that. It has existed since the days of the fall of Andalusia. The Spanish Catholics, when they took Andalusia from the Muslims, did not purify Muslims, but purified Muslims and Jews. The Jews fled from Andalusia. There are many places in the world where they fled, such as France, Italy, North Africa, and most went to the Ottoman Empire, which received them safely and created spaces for them to live. They did not have the desire to live in Palestine specifically. Rather, they were largely secular, adhering to their religion. They wanted a safe place to live away from persecution they suffered from in Spain, Germany, Romania, Poland, and other countries, including Russia. This remains the first motivation, which is the motivation to escape from the persecution, and Theodor Haras himself. He admitted that the Jews are hated in all countries of the world. He himself said this in the book The Jewish State, and he goes back to this hatred. For the Jews to two workers, for the first worker, if they are talented. Therefore, the world envies them for their talent, especially their talent in the field of money and the field of science. He sees this as one of the reasons, and the second reason is the Jewish mistakes. The repeated, this is the reason, brothers, that is the cause of persecution no longer exists now. I mean, that is why I'm telling you that the historical stage must be destroyed. The historical stage in which we are talking speaks the subject of persecution, which is the stage of the late 19th century and the 20th century, until half of it was approximately after World War II. The situation has changed greatly, and persecution does not exist for the Jews. On the contrary, the Jews have become present anywhere in the world. They have status, respect, prestige, and people fear them, even if it is you. You don't like them, but by supporting them. No one can speak about the Jews in most European countries or most countries of the world now. This factor no longer exists now, but he was the basis for the Jews going to the land of Palestine. The second factor is very important. It is also the religious factor. There are religious Jewish people who say that our Lord Almighty promised them the promised land, which is the land of Zion, which includes Mount Zion, which is why they call it the Zionist movement, which is from the Nile to the Euphrates. Its center is Palestine, and it waxes from the Nile to the Euphrates based on their claim or their words. And of course we put this map above the Knesset, and we put it above their currency and their world, in which there are the two blue lines that remove the Rainier and the Euphrates. The issue is not an issue. They are unconscious, or they do not announce them. There are no declared cases, and a clear case, very close. For many religious people, or for some religious Jews, they are going to achieve this goal. In their minds, it's not about economic issues or persecution. They are driven by religious beliefs. Because of the religious part, but to be honest, there is also not much margin in the 2000 scale. The originally religious Jews, a few of them have increased in the last 20 years. There has been a tangible increase, so they almost continued the religious among the Jews, followed by the Jews who live in Palestine, religious N. The two are secular. Religion is not in their minds. They have interests other than the interest of religion. And third, doesn't this religious person all support a state? Jews in the land of Palestine? No, on the contrary, there is a huge sector of religious people. The Jews believe that a state for the Jews should not be established in the land of Palestine, including the Haredi sect, for example. The Haredi sect is a large Jewish sect, and it has parties, and some of its parties support Netanyahu in his last prime minister. They see that they are not supposed to establish a state for the Jews in the land of Palestine, and that establishing a state for the Jews, the land is Palestine. This is the mission of the king. The awaited king for them is like the awaited Christ in Christianity, and as we say, the descent of the Christ at the end of time. For them, what they imagine is an awaited king who will come to help the Jews or support the Jews, and this awaited king will not establish a state for the Jews. They are not the ones who will establish the state. It is possible for these people in seminars, conferences, marches, and actions in Europe and America to take advantage of this aspect. We can cooperate with them in some programs or some conferences in which they say their point of view against the establishment of a state for the Jews in the land of Palestine. He remains a witness from its people. He remains a man from the people of the people. The same religion or the same country. They say, by God, we are wrong in establishing this homeland on the land of Palestine, and that this homeland is a right for the Palestinians. The group of religious motivation is split into two. One section supports a Jewish state in Palestine, while the other opposes it. We must distinguish between the religions, noting that Christianity, particularly Protestant Zionism, supports the establishment of a state in Palestine. Additionally, there is a social and economic motivation for the Jews. Someone whose financial circumstances are very difficult, he lives in America, he does not live in Germany or England, anywhere, or in Russia, and his financial circumstances are difficult, he has financial needs, he has a lot of debts, or he is one of those with special needs, or he has children a lot, he has a need for money, and he does not know how to investigate the place where he is, so they offer him financial temptations, and the Jews are doing housework, large finances to support this issue. They offer temptations to me. People offer them housing, for example. Well, second means that even in cities, I have housing prices in settlements for second prices that are much lower because the situation of settlements is more dangerous than the situation of cities. So they seem temptations to live in settlements. The apartment in the settlements remains 20% of its price in the Jewish cities in the land of Palestine. There are great temptations for people if she comes to live here in this country. The place has financial temptations. Money to come in Social Security. They provide Social Security, especially for the first child and the second child. They provide temptations to study in Jewish universities in the land of Palestine, and universities, some of which are advanced, some of which are of a global level and ranking. They provide procedures for studying for Jewish students in different countries of the world. They come to study in Palestine, and then after that, meaning in the hope that after that they will return or not return to their country, but of course it will provide them with work and a certain status, so they continue. In the land of Palestine, after the end of the study, the Israeli passport, due to a status in the world of advanced passports, enters 162 countries in the world without a visa or with a visa from the airport. This is a number that means this is one of the developed countries in the world in a number in the strength of the passport. Many countries want economic and social protection. This is one of the motives that is the next motive. We said the first motive, persecution, and this does not exist now, but it was the basis for the formation of the state and the need. The second motive, which is the religious motive, and this we said there is a half in favor and a half in opposition. And we said the third motive, which is the economic motive, the need for money and the social, and we said the fourth and last motive, the political motive. In fact, there is a certain country in which certain political circumstances occurred. In fact, there is a certain country in which certain political circumstances occurred. The Jews do not know how to live in this turmoil. Politically, they were living and happy in that country, but when political unrest occurred, they still wanted to change the place where they lived to another place. Palestine as one of the choices nominated for me to take them, like for example what happened in Egypt and North Africa after the year 56. After 56, he was in great hostility too. For Yod, the Jews feel that they are living in Egypt, and in the 60s they are living in Tunisia. and Morocco because they were not marginalized and settled in the country, and that the country was heading in a possible direction in which there would be hatred or incompatibility in coexistence with the Jews. They decided to migration, people who emigrated from Arabic from the year 48 to the year Hajjah in 60 or early 70s, 850,000 Jews. Every state they went to. On Palestine, when the Soviet Union fell 91 to the year 2000. This decade for 10 years, 1,000 emigrated, one from Russia to Palestine. They caused a boom in the number of Jews in the land of Palestine, also in the 80s. The Flesh movement, the Flesh Jews were Jews living in Ethiopia. It was also an episode of transporting a very large number of Jews from Ethiopia to the land of Palestine. Ukraine. When the Ukraine war broke out in 2022, a large number of Ukrainian Jews immigrated to the land of Palestine and elsewhere. Even when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran in the year 979, a very large number of Iranian Jews immigrated from Iran to the land of Palestine, and so on. The state of Israel remains the four main motives for which Jews migrate from different countries of the world to the land of Palestine. Of course, as a conclusion to the episode, I say that it does not prevent there being other motives. It is not forbidden for one immigrant to have more than one motive, meaning that he has a religious motive and at the same time an economic motive. His financial circumstances are difficult, and at the same time the country in which he lives politically has difficult circumstances, meaning that it is possible for one man to have multiple motives. I also want to say that there are Jewish bodies that have decided against the establishment of a state for the Jews in the land of Palestine, not from a religious standpoint, but from a political standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, or from a humanitarian standpoint. Certain bodies see the land of Palestine as a right for Palestinians, not for Yahweh, or at least see the establishment of two states, such as the Jewish Voice for Peace. The body exists in America. It is not religious, a secular and Jewish body, but it resists the establishment of a homeland for the Jews in the land of Palestine, and therefore it is possible to cooperate with such verses and with individual Jews who are very opposed to the establishment of a state. For the Jews in the land of Palestine and individuals with big names, for example, in history, Einstein, for example, was one of the most famous Jewish scholars and was opposed to the establishment of a state for the Jews in the land of Palestine, as well as Freud, the famous Jewish psychologist, was also opposed to the establishment of a state. And we look at the names of many names on the idea of this topic in order to know with whom we cooperate with an attack, meaning that they did not all marginalize one package. No, in some of them. Who has an opinion? Among them is another opinion, and opposing opinions can be investigated behind them. Studying these factors and their impacts is essential for promoting reverse migration to Palestine instead of migration out of it. We ask God to liberate all of Palestine and grant victory and patience to Muslims. May God's peace, mercy, and blessings be upon you.